Hello, I'm Mike Bithell, and I made, well, this game, Thomas Was Alone. Thank you for buying a copy. That's very kind of you, unless you've pirated it, in which case, please go and buy a copy. It's in sales quite regularly, hopefully. It's weird speaking to you from the past. So, this is Thomas. He was named originally by the community. The game's name, Thomas Was Alone, was arrived upon by a friend of mine who sarcastically suggested I should call the game Thomas Was Alone because that's emo, and emos would like it, and emos post links, which was sarcastic and lame in a weird way, but also actually weirdly right. We found that people were associating the red rectangle at the start of the game with the name Thomas, so giving the game that name immediately started a story going. And that happened in lots of ways throughout the game, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So this is step one, side-to-side movement. If you're a platforming game fan, it should not present too much of a challenge to you, but here it's really just about easing the player into the way the world works, seeing gravity for the first time, understanding how falling feels, and then actually kind of talking about that in the voiceover to kind of have a bit of fun with it. It's also introducing the idea of a narrated story, and it's introducing Thomas, so we hopefully kind of do quite a few things here at the same time. It also does the job of setting up Thomas as an inquisitive character. This is really important, and he becomes inquisitive, he becomes more and more interested by the world and tries to make assumptions about it, and that's kind of what his character is all about, at least at the start. Jumping had to be right. It's kind of the main way you interact in this game, obviously. I did a lot of research. I got kind of obsessive about it. It took me, I was still fiddling with the jump physics, I think, about 3 weeks before I launched the game. So it's something that just got fiddled with. It had to feel right. And yeah, there's one problem here actually, and we'll talk about problems on this as well. I think the biggest issue here was that the speech is a bit misjudged. It takes a little bit long to get through, so most players when they play the game have already jumped and are at the exit by the time Danny suggests that they should jump. So I think that's an issue throughout a few of these first levels, so I think going back I would have done maybe a bit briefer here. This is a challenging jump, so this is a jump where the player can fail at it. So there's a gap, but the whole point of this level is to introduce the idea of jump distance and the fact that you can fall from a jump, but hopefully in kind of a safe environment. So here you can't die, you can't lose. All you're going to do is keep doing it until you succeed. And it's kind of a little bit easier than it looks as well, so hopefully even if a player gets frustrated and just keeps clicking through it, they will actually eventually succeed. And the voiceover kind of calls attention to that in kind of a fun way as well, just to kind of reiterate that to the player. I played a lot of Uncharted before making this level, and it's kind of inspired by those kind of scripted moments in games. I didn't do as many in the game as I kind of expected to at the start. There's a few reasons for that, but I played a lot of Uncharted before making this level, and it's kind of inspired by those kind of scripted moments in games. I didn't do as many in the game as I kind of expected to at the start. There's a few reasons for that, but I guess the main one was that once the players kind of, gets the mechanics in a good enough way, I didn't want to completely kind of overwhelm them with stuff that wasn't as interactive. But here it's cool because it sets up failure for the first time. It sets up what failure looks like, it sets up challenge, but it's not real. So you can't fail this map unless you run backwards. If you run forwards, the columns don't fall until you've actually left them. Which hopefully kind of does the job of explaining that a little bit better. So this is a subtle one, but it's kind of important, and I know I'm talking a lot about game design introduction. This is by the way, this isn't like innovative in any way. This is Mario. This is every game you ever played. But I think it's kind of interesting to go through the steps. So here, this is a very specific skill. This is jumping up onto steps, but pressing jump and then moving once you've pressed jump. So here, if you just hold down, the direction key and then jump, you're actually going to hit the bottom of a staircase. What you need to do is jump and then in midair move across. And this is just a really subtle, simple level that kind of introduces that as a concept to the player. They don't actually have to do it that much in the main game, but it's useful to just kind of make sure that that's something I know the player can do at this early stage. So here is kind of, we're extrapolating on precision. It's essentially, we've done it in the previous level, we've made you do it. And here we're kind of queuing up a few of those. So if you fail at one, you can actually force yourself to go back a couple of steps in the progress. This is kind of the first time we're challenging the player, which is important, but it's important as well that it's not overwhelming. It's still very early days. I haven't yet shown you the kind of the differentiating mechanic of Thomas. So it's again just kind of bringing players up to speed with stuff and starting to show them how a game would work in this space. I didn't add respawning to the game until about a month before release. It's a classic example of something that every playtest I ever did. So basically, if you died in the game previous to a month before it came out, you were basically reset the level. So it didn't matter how much progress you'd made, you'd reset the level to the very start of the level, your characters back where they started. Which means that you could, if you died late on in a level, lose about 5 minutes of gameplay. This was not good. And the playtesters told me at length in capital letters that it wasn't good in emails. But what I tried to do, what I realised was it was very hard to do, but I worked out about a month before release how to do it, and went back and added all these respawner points. And I'm so glad I did. If I hadn't done that, I think the game would have got very, 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 very tedious instead of its current level of kind of reasonable tediousness. It's also the reason why I think the game, sometimes people feel the game might be a little bit too easy, because I built the levels with that kind of failure in mind. So as you go through most of the levels in Thomas, they actually get easier as they go on, because I didn't want players to get frustrated. So I think that might be something I should make sure that I have the respawning system planned more than a month before release next time. Lighting. It's a weird one, the lighting. I didn't have lighting at one stage, there wasn't light. Then it was sounding a bit biblical. But as it went on, I kind of added that in. Initially, I was doing them by hand for every level, and basically this procedural system kind of came out of laziness. I didn't want to do that anymore. And weirdly, as a side effect of that, it was cool, and the shadows moved and could be kind of related to placement of objects, placement of characters, and it was good. It's actually faked, because the game was made in free Unity. I didn't have any shadows within the game kind of proper, so what I did was they're kind of stretched rectangles. So I place a corner of the rectangle at each corner which the shadow is projecting from, and then kind of stretch them off into the distance. Any coder listening to this just lost all respect for me, because that's the most wasteful way you could possibly do this. But it kind of worked, and yeah, we just went with it. And it's one of the things that people seem to like. So yeah, fortunately it's rectangles, so I can be wasteful. Okay, so this is the moving platform corridor. This was an attempt to bring in something that's going to become very important in a very short amount of time, the moving platforms. It's really hard to introduce moving platforms because moving platforms move, and that makes them challenging and makes them a kind of a complex interaction. So what the corridor here allows me to do is introduce you to the idea that sometimes the ground moves, but in a way that doesn't actually kind of impact you too much, and won't cause you, hopefully, to get too stressed out. People seem to like it. It's kind of a bouncy castle level. People tend to have fun as they move through it, which is quite cool. And yeah, it looks interesting, and hopefully it just kind of introduces the concept. This is the most important level in the game. This is the point where I basically get to the point. And arguably I should have done it a little bit sooner. However, this is where it is, and that's fine. So this is the point where the player has to learn how to switch characters, which is kind of the basis of the entire thing, is this switching between the characters. This is also actually one of the first levels. This is almost identical to the version that was in the original Flash game. You have two characters, both on the wrong side with their alternating targets. It's hopefully a space that makes a lot of sense. Kind of logically you can understand what's going on with it. There's no lighting that's complex in it. It's quite flat. It's intentionally, hopefully, everything about this level is designed to get out of your way so you can learn essentially, a few things. One, how to switch characters, obviously. Two, how to, the targets. The targets are specific to the character. And three, the difference in abilities, so you should work out that Chris needs help. If I can get those 3 lessons to you, and if you've completed the level, then you've learnt all those lessons, the rest of the game becomes much, much more achievable. This was a weird little accident, this level, actually. There's, on Thomas on the right there, as you move up, you're moving through trigger boxes. If you don't make games, trigger boxes are basically spaces you jump into or move into, and they cause something in the game to happen. So as you move up as Thomas, you're hitting these trigger boxes which cause the walls to come in. But as a really weird coincidence, I got one of the timings wrong, so that as you moved up, there's a certain point where it looks like you can jump somewhere, you jump to it, and the wall flies out and hits you in the face. It's kind of a funny moment. And I did it, and I thought it was funny, and it felt kind of organic. And I took it to, when I started showing the game to people, it happened to everyone. It's a weird thing that it seems to catch everyone out. Even though there's nothing forcing you into it, 90% of the time people get hit in the face. And most of the time they laugh. So I left it in, and I'm really happy with it, actually. It's one of those nice little coincidences that worked out really well. Steps. Everyone loved the steps. They didn't, actually, and it's probably my biggest design regret in the game is steps. Basically are kind of obstacles that you have to jump over by kind of piling up a few characters in order to get through. That's fine. The problem with steps is that you have to do that repeatedly, that you have to essentially solve the same puzzle over and over again in a sequence, and there's just 2 or 3 too many times I do that in the whole game, and it's frustrating to players. It sucks. I went through and I removed quite a few of them, so if you're annoyed, you would have been more annoyed if I'd left it how it was. So yeah, it's a shame. I think there's some which are more acceptable than others, but yeah, if that's the worst bit of design in the game, I'm pretty happy though. So yeah, lesson learned. This level's a great example of how useful playtesting is. This map was always very similar to this, but there was one major kind of design difference, was that the stepping stones at the bottom of the screen had had no wall below them, so they were floating over water, which meant that you could fail about 8 or 9 times here, causing you to get very frustrated and angry. And it wasn't a soft fail where your character fell through and you got back up and carried on. It was a cruel, harsh fail that reset the level. And my playtesters hated it. So this is a great example of the kind of thing that to me was invisible, because I understood how the characters moved and I was, making them and playing them all the time. To me, it was a really easy sequence of stepping stones that you can get through first time every time. But once I put it in front of playtesters, I got emails from people saying it was taking them like 45 minutes to get through this level because of that problem. So just sticking a wall underneath, I kept the water because it looked nice, but the sticking a wall underneath really kind of helped and just smoothed people through. People are still working out the game at this stage, and I don't want to kick them too much in the face. I've already hit them in the face with a wall. Danny really, well, I should have mentioned Danny a little bit sooner. He just does so much. It's a long story that I've told lots of places, but basically I wrote the story for him. I was trying to find a voice that would suit the game, and I was a big fan of his writing and his kind of audiobooks and radio stuff and all the things he does. And I wrote the part kind of with his voice in mind. And then I tried to find people who could do it, and no one could do it. And then I got drunk and emailed him, and he said yes, which was a bit of a shock. So I'm really chuffed. He did an awesome job. He's been really cool with the game. He's talked about it. He's been lovely, and he's just a really nice chap. He's also really fast. I'm recording this after recording some other stuff with Danny, and he's amazingly quick at what he does. I'm doing a much worse job, and the people in the booth are getting bored, I imagine, at this point. pick John. John's my favourite character. Well, I'm going to say that a few times because I've got quite a few favourite characters, but John I really in particular like. He's insecure. In a weird way. I'm not entirely sure why he is, but he is. And that leads him to kind of be dishonest and narcissistic, which I think a large number of creative people will associate with. I know I do. And he's so he's a really interesting character. I like the way he grows. I like that his journey as he goes on, and I like the way that his power of kind of basically being the highest jumper is usurped later on by Sarah, and what that does to his view on his situation. So he's a very cool character. This is another level actually from the original Flash game, which obviously I tweaked and kind of brought across. I really liked the idea of confined spaces as applied to this game, because with large spaces, having multiple characters with different abilities kind of hopefully feels kind of empowering, feels like you can do anything and get anywhere. Putting them into a confined space kind of becomes an interesting kind of jumble. They get in each other's way, they trip over each other. There's a nice little bit of narration here that kind of highlights that stuff. But it was just something really cool to play with. The other thing is, and I do this all over the place in this game, is I really love adding a character who has a specific ability and then not letting you use it for a little while. But specifically because I just think it builds anticipation. John can jump really high. You've seen that, and to then put him in a space where you can't play with that button is just kind of hopefully kind of intriguing and frustrating, and you want to pull through. And you're kind of with John in this level. John is angered by his situation. He just wants to be free. So hopefully kind of the player aligns at that point with John. This level exists solely to allow the player to feel their way into John. This is a chance for you to basically make him jump properly for the first time, and hopefully because of the constraints in the last level, that feels awesome. And I actually use the word awesome in the narration just to push you in case that's not how you're feeling. You should, it's a very good game. And then, so you've now got access to this awesome jump, and you can do what you feel.
John decided to press the switch to let the little dots catch up with him. John cared for his new allies. You could tell from the sympathetic expression he'd practiced in the mirror all these years.
is the this is getting very self-deprecating, but I think this is the weakest level in the game. I came very, very close to cutting it. This is where the staircase repetition kind of becomes, well, boring. I did do a lot. I shifted things around, kind of varied the step sizes and gaps, and to add variety. But it's a lot better than it was. But it was not. It's the one that when I'm watching Let's Plays, and I'll talk a bit more about Let's Plays in a bit. But the way it's kind of the one that I fast forward through on the Let's Plays because I find it very, very slow. I don't know. That might just be over familiarity, but I don't like this level. Have fun with it though, and I'll see you in the next one.
He didn't mind them so much either. The red one, Thomas, had a charming way of applauding every time John jumped. The angry orange one was less immediately likeable, but his unremitting cynicism and tutting amused John.
this is actually the last level of the demo, so it's kind of important for that reason. But the kind of the big design lesson here, and you'll notice I guess like the lessons are slowing down at this point. But the big lesson here is that there's a temporary portal success. So previously all the portals have sat on a static ground. So you queue someone up, you queue someone up, you queue someone up. With this one, you have to finish this level by having Thomas falling through that portal. And it's hopefully it's kind of safe. If you miss your timing or you get him through early, you can always catch back up with yourself. So it doesn't punish you if you don't get it immediately. But it's something I really wanted to do later on, and there's quite a few places where I play with this idea. So yeah, it's that basically. It's a way of introducing that, and hopefully kind of hints at the possibilities if you're playing the demo of kind of where the game can continue on from there. Claire is all about the setup. To buy the fact that she actually thinks that swimming is a superpower, you kind of have to set her up before that as feeling weak. And Claire's not weak. She's not a weak character. She's not rubbish at jumping either. That's something she says. She's on a par with a lot of the other characters. But that insecurity hopefully kind of warms you to her, and you're with her at the point where she realizes she has that superpower. You feel excited because you want a nice thing to happen to that character who you kind of had a, not pity, but kind of a sensitivity towards. What's really interesting with Claire is in a lot of the reviews and the kind of the chatter about the game that happens online, people say that Claire is fat and that she's insecure about being fat. Which is really odd, because I never thought of Claire as fat. She's big because she has to carry characters later. That's the kind of a design concern. And at no point does the script mention her weight or even that she has a physical insecurity. And that's kind of weird and odd, but it's also absolutely awesome, because if players are kind of coming to the game and placing these meanings on it without kind of me telling them, that's cool. It's really interesting. Whenever fan art's done, she's the big boned character, which is fascinating, and I like that players have kind of built their own little story on top of her. So exactly the same way as with John, I kind of really enjoyed the idea of introducing a swimming character and then having a level that you couldn't swim in. So there's that, and just me being cheeky again, basically. But the big lesson here is the idea of getting Claire to carry another character. So there's one point right at the start of the level, you have to get John to carry Claire. You have to, there's no way of completing the level without doing it. Which was cool, and kind of introduces that idea of carrying someone along. And then you've got an optional, you can do it over the stepping stones straight after, with Claire underneath and John on top. Surprisingly, a lot of players don't do that. I don't know if they don't see it, or they kind of, they don't make that leap yet. But hopefully that idea's been implanted, because that's very useful later on. And I said it was useful later on. It's useful immediately after, which is this level, which is the payoff where you carry characters back and forth. I also really like the whole the fox chicken grain logic puzzle, and it's kind of Thomas's little nod to that. It's just something that people hopefully kind of will work out and kind of start to see what Claire can do and start planning out with that ability in mind in later puzzles. This is probably the most showy level. This is epic. This is the one that always goes in the trailer. I stole Rain from the method for doing Rain from Quick Fingers, who's an awesome Unity dude who I'm now fortunate enough to work with. And it's cool. It's a big epic moment. This is much like those falling platforms earlier on. This is kind of one of those big semi-scripted sequences, because the pace is defined by the water. So therefore, I know that if a player's surviving, they are playing through at a certain speed. And it's cool. It also builds on the idea of carrying from earlier, but this time under pressure. So you have to move quicker, and you haven't got time to think. And if you try and get Thomas off of Claire, you're going to run into problems very quickly. So there's that as well. So it's hopefully kind of a nice way of solidifying all the learning the player's done about Claire up to this point.
Was she more the lone Avenger type? She'd like that. the sole hero in a world of rectangles and conveniently placed pools of toxic water.
Steps. I'm so sorry. On the upside, two things. One, I changed the shape of the steps, which I feel kind of massively improves them. And two, I then sarcastically make a joke about steps in the script. So you can laugh with me at my lack of design ideas up to this point.
The others told Claire that staircases were a bit of a fixture here. Claire wondered why the world made it so difficult.
This is one of my favourite levels. What's nice about this level is it breaks the thinking and learning you've done up to this point. So up to this point, I've been teaching you that Claire is for carrying other characters. If I'd not done that, this level would be a lot easier. It's because you've been told to carry characters for every level up to this point, your automatic reaction to a body of water is to jump Claire in and pile up all your characters, and that's not the solution. I love the fact that this puzzle kind of only exists in the head of the player. And it's great watching, Let's Plays and when I was doing playtesting and taking it to events and stuff, that you actually see people performing the action you've taught them to do of getting the characters on top of Claire, and then realising that's not the solution, that the solution is much simpler than they think. And there's only a few places in the game I managed to pull that off, but I'm really, really happy with this one. Music. David came in, well, actually he came in pretty early. Basically the original Flash game had no music, and one of the biggest criticisms was that there was no music, there were no sound effects either. So I had to get someone, and I kind of fortunately found David through a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, and he did a cool little demo, which is now actually over the end credits, and he was awesome. I got him in, he wrote this amazing piece of music for each kind of chapter of the game. Basically the way we worked is I would send him kind of the emotional script for the game of how the character's feeling, what's the setup here, and he'd work from that and kind of build a piece of music. About halfway through development, I made his life a lot harder because I decided I wanted a randomized procedural system, so you'll never hear the game too obviously loop. They're basically little sequences of music that kind of get piled up in interesting ways. And he was really good. He was really good with that. He split up what he'd already made and made it work, and then every track from that point on used that system really, really well. So he was really adaptive, and he's awesome. And he's like 14. Well, he's not 14, but he's very young, and it frustrates me how talented he is. I had a really good time working with him. So thank you, David. So this is an attempt to do a puzzle with kind of multiple solutions. This again was one of the very early levels I made. It was more of a kind of a test level originally, just to kind of check that all the characters were interacting correctly, the platforms were working the way I wanted them to. And it's cool because everyone has a different way of doing it. There's lots of ways of optimally doing it, but then there's lots of ways of also doing it in kind of cool show-off ways, which is nice. It's a good chance actually to talk about the backgrounds. So the backgrounds I was going to do kind of, much like the shadows, I was kind of going to do specific bespoke level backgrounds, and it was working all right. They didn't look great, mainly because I just wasn't spending enough time on them. This is a 100-level game, and it just wasn't working. So in the end, I did kind of a procedural system. So they're freeze-framed particle effects. So basically, I draw them all off from a batch of images, place them at different parallax depths, and just go with it. So hopefully that kind of gives everything a nice texture, and kind of I think it brings all the levels together, and it means that every time you play a level it looks a bit different, which is fun.
They were doing really well. Claire hoped she could get them all across. John was fully aware he could do this alone. Thomas hoped he'd never have to.
This is where I introduced spikes. I needed a hazard. I needed two things. I needed a hazard that that Claire couldn't get past, so not water, basically, something that she could get hurt by. And I also needed a hazard I could put on ceilings. I did actually try, because it's all in a virtual world. I was like, oh well, it's fine. I'll have upside down water, and it looked rubbish, as I'm sure you'd expect. So the spikes got added. I introduced them specifically just with Claire, just so you can, as a player, learn that Claire is actually going to be damaged by them, and it kind of just changes the relationship a little bit between Claire and the environment, and hopefully in a safe way. This level's pretty straightforward.
They were most likely her kryptonite, not the rubbish red kryptonite either, the proper radioactive green stuff.
I've got two versions of the commentary for this level. The first version is that, from a narrative perspective, I needed to establish that there was an intelligence to the system you're in, that there were negative forces, and I needed to disrupt the flow of play in order to make you aware that that was there. So a glitch kind of made a lot of sense, and it's kind of something the Matrix does deja vu quite a bit to kind of show you that something's been changed, and that was cool. The other version, and the more honest version, was that I had a very near deadline in order to take the game to a festival, and I had to have another level. I don't know why I'd set myself an actual kind of level count. No one was judging me or questioning me. 29 levels would have been just as good as 30 levels, but I did, and this was a nice way of reusing that map. Once I'd made it, I kind of assumed I'd always remove it, but once I'd made it, I actually thought it was quite cool, and there's a few little tweaks. So the moving platform moves a little bit faster, and obviously Thomas is there. So I kind of liked actually reusing the same space with different characters as kind of a way of twisting a puzzle. I didn't want to do it too many times in the game, because I figured, people would just feel I was being a bit cheeky and not making enough content. But it was a nice thing to just do once, and to just see how that mixed things up. It's only it's only as we record these that I'm realizing quite how much I played the new character, but you can't use them properly yet card. I do it all over the place. So in this moment, this is obviously Laura is introduced and deliberately separated out from Chris. It's nice because it lets us kind of learn who Laura is before we start interacting with her, and kind of it gives some context to what the interaction that she has with the characters later. So that's hopefully quite fun. I do this far too much, and I need to not do this in future projects. Not as much.
Hang out. As long as he didn't find out what she could do, which would never happen so long as they stayed separate.
Pixel clouds were something I worked on early on. It was one of those weird ones where I had the idea for it kind of art-wise before I actually kind of worked out how to use them in the game itself. So I thought it would be cool to have these big swirling kind of pixel shapes. And they look cool, and I made them, and then I kind of had to work out where they were useful. And actually, this was the point where I developed the game in semi-chronological order, so I just kind of had the issue where I wanted to convey that the world was kind of turning on the characters a little bit, and it made sense to use the pixel clouds as an enemy to kind of show that the world was negatively kind of fighting back against their progress a little bit. And here it's a build-up, so the whole purpose of these levels is to kind of just slowly introduce the pixel cloud, kind of make the player more and more aware that they're a threat, and their relationship changes. So right now they're just watching, they're just there every now and again, they're glimpses, and they become more important as the game goes on. Okay, so this level is, again, it was a kind of a test level that I made that kind of later became something that was actually really useful and interesting in the game. The point of this level really is just to get you used to the idea that Laura changes people's jump heights. That's basically it. It's done earlier in the portal placement. You hopefully kind of half got it, but I just don't want to assume that you did. So here you have to actually kind of work out that bouncing actually kind of helps you progress. It's nice, it kind of gets you to learn it, it's safe, there's no threats, and yeah, it's cool. I liked it, I thought it was nice. I also didn't realise actually at the point where I was making this level that Laura and Chris were a perfect match, and I kind of played with that a bit more as it went on. I struggled to work out different puzzles involving Laura, because basically she makes things jump higher. That's a limited kind of scope. And one of the very kind of the cool ideas I had, I think, with Laura was specifically to keep her separate from the play space, so she couldn't interact directly with characters, but to have enough of her kind of poke out of a wall or be available to the other players that they could interact and get a benefit from her. And it allowed me to do things like this level where you have kind of an indirect relationship spatially with between the two characters. And I really like it, actually. I think it's kind of interesting. I'd have liked to have done a few more of these.
She'd wonder what he was up to. Was he missing her? He wasn't saying very much.
So this is the first time that a cloud has actually appeared in the play space. It's impossible for you to actually interact with them because it flies away so quickly. But it's that kind of encroachment. It should hopefully feel that they're slowly but surely building up their interest and kind of like a wild animal, kind of building up their tolerance of the characters, and they're getting closer and closer and encroaching more and more on the game space. So hopefully that's kind of building up a little bit. I want the tension to build up. I want the presence of those clouds to be more and more known as the game goes on. And obviously we're starting to hit a point where the characters are starting to talk about that threat, and that's coming to the fore a little bit. Chris and Laura falling in love was not actually part of the original, the structure I laid out online. I actually put up the entire kind of narrative arc of the game online like a year ago. And I wasn't planning on putting those two together in a relationship. But as I worked on both their arcs and worked out kind of the journeys they were both going on, it became more and more clear that the relationship was kind of a perfect way of illustrating both characters' growth. So Chris is realising that other people aren't necessarily the worst thing in the world. So the idea of him forming a real relationship with someone is good for him for that purpose, to kind of show that. And with Laura, she's just learning to trust others, which again is something that hopefully a relationship kind of symbolises for her. So that was it was kind of a late choice, but I think it kind of just gives both those characters a little bit more and lets the player see what's changing with them, which is cool.
Was it too early to refer to Laura as his girlfriend? Only if I say it out loud, he told himself. He didn't want to scare her off.
So this is one of the very first levels I made. Actually, this was something. It was experiential. This is something I've realised that a lot of the levels in Thomas, they weren't designed around a puzzle. They were designed around an activity that I thought would be quite fun to do. So here, for example, this is about kind of getting a sequence of bounces working and how that feels to the player, and having those little constraints on what you can do. It feels fun bouncing up. Just managing to hit each of those buttons. The height of the ceiling is kind of hopefully perfectly judged so that just feels nice, and it's cool. And I never really thought of it from a story perspective, but I thought the design was cool. What's really, really cool is as I start to watch more and more Let's Plays, and I watch every Let's Play. If you put a Let's Play of the game up, I've watched it at some point, much to the annoyance of my girlfriend. And one thing that's happened in a few Let's Plays is people see a story in this moment. They see, because Chris is separated out and John and Laura are hanging out, they see that as a moment where Chris is jealous, which is really interesting, because it's, again, not something I'd thought of, much like the Claire obesity issue. That sounds like a great movie. That could be a good thriller, the Claire obesity issue. I like that. Sorry, I'm going off topic. So it's a lot like some of the other levels earlier on. This is a point where so this is one of the very first levels I made. Actually, this was something. It was experiential. This is something I've I've realised that a lot of the levels in Thomas, they weren't designed around a puzzle. They were designed around an activity that I thought would be quite fun to do. So here, for example, this is about kind of getting a sequence of bounces working and how that feels to the player, and having those little constraints on what you can do. It feels fun bouncing up, just managing to hit each of those buttons. The height of the ceiling is kind of hopefully perfectly judged so that just feels nice. And it's cool, and I never really thought of it from a story perspective, but I thought the design was cool. What's really, really cool is as I start to watch more and more Let's Plays, and I watch every Let's Play. If you put a Let's Play of the game up, I've watched it at some point, much to the annoyance of my girlfriend. And one thing that's happened in a few Let's Plays is people see a story in this moment. They see, because Chris is separated out and John and Laura are hanging out, they see that as a moment where Chris is jealous, which is really interesting, because it's, again, not something I'd thought of, much like the Claire obesity issue. That sounds like a great movie. That could be a good thriller, the Claire obesity issue. I like that. Sorry, I'm going off topic. So it's nice that people kind of saw a relationship forming, and they saw a meaning to the layout of the geometry in this level, which is cool, and kind of I think it means people were actually getting into the characters, which is really cool, really nice. So a lot like some of the other levels earlier on, this is a point where hopefully the player can kind of work out their own solutions to puzzles. They've got kind of an environment that goes through a loop, and they can kind of work out the way they want to approach it, and there's lots of different ways of doing it. The other big thing that's introduced here, I think, is the dotted lines. I think this is the first time you've seen them. The dotted lines were a problem that didn't really come up until this level, which was the idea of objects moving through barriers to the player. It's something that I hadn't really considered, and I'd not done earlier, and I didn't like the idea of them just moving through each other, because, I mean, that would work, but technically, but it wouldn't look right. It would look odd that a wall went into another wall. So I wanted something that kind of made a bit more logical sense. Dotted line feels almost like I guess it's weird. It makes more sense. It feels like a barrier, which is logical for the player, but it looks permeable. It looks like another thing could go through it quite nicely. So I'm really happy with that solution. It kind of didn't break the minimalism. It kind of felt logical. And yeah, I use them quite a bit throughout the game as the game goes on. It's a nice way of allowing me to move things in a way that doesn't necessarily feel logically real-world-y.
Rude.